So, with regard to Plato, now I mentioned that all the guys before Plato, all the pre-Socratics we only have very fragmentary pieces of their work quoted by other people. It's very sketchy. Whereas with Plato, almost everything and all the important dialogues we know are authentic. There are some dialogues, but they're not anything that we looked at that are questioned, and a couple of the letters are questioned, but we are pretty sure we have uh, all the actual or all the main actual dialogues of Plato. And this is because of contemporary accounts. And then now when we move to Aristotle, oddly enough, Aristotle was a student of Plato for 20 years, and we have none of his what they call exoteric writings. There are two sets of Aristotelian writings. One is exoteric, in other words, what was meant for publication, what was meant for um, to be published and spread publicly. Uh, and then what we have is what's called the esoteric writings, and these are more or less kind of notes or essays not meant for publication that were later assembled and edited by his students or followers. Uh, the original published essays we have none of, and they were supposedly entertaining and full of anecdotes and maybe jokes or, whatever. But none of that exists in the esoteric writings, and so it's really very bad to read Aristotle. I uh, I once heard it described as like eating hay. Reading Aristotle is like eating hay. It's just there's no taste, there's no flavor to it. It's very perfunctory and straightforward. Uh, so I don't recommend it. I did tell you a couple of Platonic dialogues to read if you wanted, but with Aristotle, I didn't do that. Now, uh, another thing to know about the context of the texts themselves is that Plato was lost throughout the Middle Ages. About all the Middle Ages had was the Timaeus. Some people were familiar with the Timaeus, but uh, Aristotle, on the other hand, was well known in the Middle Ages and became basically the Google for 1,000 years, the Google of the Middle Ages. And so, if you want to know anything about anything, you could look at, he was just called the philosopher. You'd look it up in Aristotle. If you want to know about astronomy, if you wanted to know about anatomy, if you wanted to know about politics, you look it up in Aristotle. And as a result, in many ways, Aristotle's more influential than Plato, and we'll be talking about that. But Plato was lost until about the Renaissance. Thomas Aquinas adopted Aristotle in a big way, and we'll get to that, but not Plato. So, in many ways, even though Plato is a formidable philosopher, for sure, no doubt about it. There's a gap in his influence in Western civilization between the ancient world and the Renaissance. All right, so what about Aristotle we need to know? First of all, he's called the father of logic, and so he uh, some people would say he's the inventor of the syllogism. I would rather say that he is somebody who realized in language there was this structure embedded in it, and what he did was formalize it. And a syllogism is a three-part argument with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So an example would be all graduates of Pomona College make $1 million a year. Tony is a graduate of Pomona College, therefore Tony makes $1 million a year. In logic, we call that a valid argument. Now, it's not a sound argument. These are the terms of art if you really want to know. It's not a sound argument because uh, we we can't validate both of the premises. We we cannot validate the first premise. Obviously, you can't uh, survey all of the graduates of Pomona College and find out their income and ascertain that they're all making $1 million or more. That's not going to happen. So that premise has to be established by what we'd call inductive logic. It wasn't called that by Aristotle, but what we mean is you need empirical evidence. You'd need to have a study to show that. So that premise, the major premise, is cannot be validated. The minor premise, Tony graduated from Pomona, that is something I could probably produce my diploma if I had to demonstrate that that did occur. But without both of those being true, the arguments can still be valid. Just to make that clear, the word valid in logic applies only to the formal structure of the argument. If if the minor premise falls into the purview of the major premise or the category of the major premise, then the conclusion follows. So uh, it's a valid argument. Just again, these are just the technical terms, but not a sound argument because the premises cannot be demonstrated. And then in the Middle Ages, they went crazy on these. I don't have these names. I have them someplace, but you could look them up. They had there's several modes of these arguments. Like for instance, you could say some um, graduates of Pomona College make $1 million a year. Tony was a graduate of Pomona College, therefore he makes $1 million a year. Now that argument is formally not valid. It doesn't make any difference whether they're true or not. The fact that I say some, you could do a Venn diagram on these. So some of them make that much. He was a graduate. Well, he's in the category of Pomona College graduates, some of which make $1 million a year and some of which don't. So we don't know which side of that he's in. So that's not a valid argument. Am I making sense? I'm trying to clarify the difference between the terminology here that we say a sound argument has to have valid premises. A valid argument doesn't have to have valid substantiated premises. It doesn't have to have true premises. Uh, okay. So anyway, Aristotle invented this, and the Middle Ages just love this stuff, and particularly Thomas Aquinas. They just went for it lock, stock, and barrel, and they thought it explained everything. I think Aristotle thought that it underpinned the nature of reality. Like, in other words, there was a metaphysical structure here that applied to reality itself. I think he probably thought that. Um, but these concepts are really embedded in the meanings of words that we all use. It's just that what he has done is kind of outlined or formalized what is already implied in the general use of the language. He's just made it clear what that structure is. Um, all right, so that's one thing he's known for, is being the father of logic. Plato did not have a formal system of logic like this. He depended on what he called collection and division, and this had to do with uh, figuring out what the meanings of terms were, what the meaning of justice is, and this was determined by the process of dialectic, which is just basically discussion, and by collected, saying, well, that doesn't quite mean that, or that, trying to uh, distinguish what the actual meaning of the word was, whereas Aristotle formalized the process. Now, you might think that since he formalized the process, then he would depend a lot on logic for his knowledge. But in fact, Aristotle, as I know we've talked about the School of Athens, that painting by Raphael that hangs in the Vatican apartments of the Pope. It doesn't hang there. It's a fresco. It's not getting out of there. Um, and where Plato's going like this and Aristotle's gesturing like this, and that's to represent the fact that Aristotle thought that we built up these ideas that Plato calls the forms. Aristotle doesn't believe that they exist in a some kind of other world. So there's no world of forms, and there's no recollecting them. Aristotle didn't believe that soul was immortal. He thought whatever we call the soul was something that we associate with the living person, and as soon as they're no longer living, that soul doesn't exist anymore. That's what Aristotle thought. And he also thought that this world of forms where things are perfect, that didn't exist either. That was some kind of fantasy that Plato thought up. It's interesting that he studied with Plato for 20 years and yet didn't buy his basic his basic thinking. And right off the bat, I said this many times, it established the fact that the teacher or the mentor is not a guru whose word we have to respect. He's open to criticism just like any other person would be. Anyway, so Aristotle thought that the way you learn these things like justice is through observation. You observe how justice works in a society. If you want to know the essence of a human being, you observe what human beings do and what they're good at. And from that, you generalize, and he has categories that he established uh, that the mind uses to interpret the universe and make generalizations about it. And uh, this was the also the program of the British empiricists, is that we had to trace whatever ideas we had back to a sense impression, an actual uh, experience of that thing. We couldn't just try to intuit it from the world of forms that Aristotle didn't believe existed. And a lot of people are attracted to this because they think it's more hard-headed and less fanciful than the Platonic idea. Uh, and my own I was persuaded by that at first myself, but over a long period of time, I've been convinced that the demonstration in the Meno and other such demonstrations do indicate an operation or modality of consciousness that Aristotle can't quite account for by just observation. And I just off the top of my head, I would say the idea that all men are created equal, uh, which we are all familiar with from Jefferson. This doesn't bear uh, uh, it doesn't lend itself to empirical proof. There's no way that you can prove that all men are created equal. The ideal is that we are all treated equal, but even that can't be learned from observation. It's an ideal. So you want to know, where do we get this ideal from? And it's certainly not within our life experience. We don't see any two people are equal, much less everyone being equal. And so that's just an example. I don't want to dwell on it too long, but it's an example of something that I think that we find appealing and strongly appealing, and yet in no way can be justified by observation. That's just an example of it. So, but what Aristotle does is say, well, if you want to know what a real person is, a real man is, you just observe who the successful people are, who the virtuous people are. Now, does that bring any question to mind from Plato? Does anybody recall Meno's paradox?
Well,
Okay.
so right that you can't, your aggregated view of all your observations still doesn't get you to that answer. There is, Plato was never willing, I think, to ever say, I know the answer. I think
That's
Aristotle thinks you can come to an answer.
I
Is
think
that,
he
would that be fair?
I think that's fair. And the question that's begged by Aristotle's definition, and to be fair, all these things have been hashed out for a couple of thousand years, and so we can't get all the nuances of every possible argument covered. But the idea is that Aristotle thinks if you look at a successful society, you can tell how a society should be run. If you look at a successful, virtuous person, you can see how you should be as a person. Well, it begs the question of who a virtuous person is. Undoubtedly, and so in other words, to make that judgment, you'd already have to have an idea of what virtue is. If you didn't know what virtue is, you couldn't tell what a virtuous person was. I'm sure there are many, many people in the United States that think Donald Trump is a virtuous person. I don't happen to share their opinion. How am I going to prove to them that he's not? Well, I don't know. I'll have to bring up my definitions of virtue. Well, where am I going to get them? He's the president. He must be the most successful person on the planet. How could he not be virtuous? Just by definition, he's the president, so he's virtuous. I'm afraid Aristotle opens himself to that sort of criticism. You can't just observe your way into, and many times on Earth, we've had situations where the most successful business or the most successful scientist that by observation you would think must be right has not proven to be right in the long run. So it's a very good question. Meno's paradox is one of the great, well, the great little puzzles of Platonism, I believe. Okay, so um, uh, so far we've got he developed logic, and he developed his ethics had to do with observation, and you build up an idea of goodness from observation.
Tony,
Yes.
can I ask you a question?
Well, of
When you
course.
use it's Meredith, when you use the term virtue in this discussion, are you talking about a person's honor? In that sense, that the person believes in the golden rule and or treats other as he would wish to be treated, and or is virtue a term of art that I've missed? Because I'm sorry I've missed
Yeah, we
a
missed
class
you.
or two.
We missed you, Meredith. Virtue for the Greeks. I mean, it's a very good question. It certainly does not include the golden rule, which we get. Well, actually, almost all religions have the golden rule, but we get it specifically from Jesus, and we will return to the
Actually,
golden.
there are scientists who think that the golden rule is something that most creatures abide by.
Preachers?
Creatures, like elephants.
Oh, creatures. I thought
Creatures,
I was hearing Billy
creatures,
Graham. Uh,
not just humans.
it's an excellent question, and the golden rule gets brought up in all kinds of different contexts for all kinds of different reasons, and it's a very good question, but I don't know of any place in Greek literature where somebody has said you should treat others as you want to be treated yourself. I don't know that exists. The
So
virtues
virtue doesn't include that.
that doesn't it virtue includes what they mean when they say virtue, and this is true of both Aristotle and Plato, is they mean a person who is I would say fully human. And so the specific virtues are wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. And so they're talking about the qualities you should have to be kind of an adult or a grown up or a decent, accomplished person. And there are
Wisdom,
two,
justice. Say it again. I'm trying
wisdom,
to.
wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Those are the four. And then sometimes it's not like there's an official list. This doesn't come from a Bible or anything like that. There's two other virtues that are sometimes listed, which are piety and beauty, interestingly enough. But these are more in ethics we call it a certain kind of ethics, virtue ethics, and what it means is how do you become the best human being you can be? It's that kind of thing, rather than what do you owe the other human beings. So that kind of thing we'll get to with um, well, with Christianity, but also with Mill and Kant. We'll get to that. You know, what are your obligations to how do you treat other people? Uh, the Greeks, the closest I know of the Greeks getting to this is that they had, and you see this in Homer, uh, a strong support of the idea of hospitality for the stranger. And you see this in the Odyssey itself. But I don't think hospitality never is listed as one of the virtues. So that's the closest we get to that Christian idea is being hospitable.
So the Greeks would say that you demonstrate your humanity by acquiring or displaying the virtues that you've listed,
Right.
and that's a judge of who you are as a person. Or
Yeah, I guess so. And people, this occurs in the Platonic dialogues. There are people who argue this in the Platonic dialogues, like Anytus, one of the guys who was an accuser of Socrates, says that you should just look at the successful people in society, and those you should admire and emulate. That's kind of what Anytus says. And Aristotle has a similar view. His great work of ethics is the Nicomachean Ethics, and uh, many people admire it. I find it just conventional. I don't myself find it very inspiring, but other people have found it really inspiring. It seems like a bunch of cliches to me, but who am I to judge Aristotle, you know? Um, okay. Another thing I wanted to get to that's Aristotle is famous for is the four causes. And the word cause is used in Aristotle not in a typical way we would use the word cause. It's more like if you're going to understand what anything is, you have to look at these four elements of its existence. And he calls them causes, but um, they are the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. So let me go through those. The material cause is what it's made out of physically. The formal cause is what its shape is. And that's kind of a wider definition than just shape, but we'll use shape for now. And then the efficient cause is how it came to be. And the final cause is its purpose. And you know, still in biology today, if you're a scientist and you just discovered some sea creature that nobody's ever seen before, it has an odd shape and is transparent, they're doing all, they're doing this as we speak. All these weird creatures are being discovered that exist in this very strange environment. Um, you want to ask yourself, okay, was this cloned? Did it come to be by sexual reproduction? Well, you know, the protoplasm, we probably can understand the cells, but even that, you know, sometimes the creatures that live at these extreme depths and low temperatures, sometimes they have physical attributes that we're not familiar with and never seen before. So that would be part of I guess, the material cause, and then the efficient cause was how they came to be. Were they born from sexual reproduction? Were they kind of cloned? How did that happen? The formal cause is obvious. What shape are they? But then the final cause is one that's often a puzzle. Like we will look at the organs of some newly discovered creature, and you ask, well, what is this thing doing? And what is that thing doing? We still are investigating that within the cells of human tissue. Like exactly what is the function of this little part of this little like mitochondria? What is the function of that? So this idea of Aristotle's that we want to know the function of things to totally understand them is called telos. The Greek word is telos, Telos. And from that, we get the term teleology, which is what we use in ethics a lot. What is the purpose? Teleological ethics are what are you trying to achieve here? Whereas deontological ethics are what rules should we follow here? It's different kind of ethics, which we'll get to. But anyway, telos is a big deal with Aristotle, and it's going to be a very important thing down to this day because it's picked up by the Catholic Church. What is the purpose? What is God's purpose for all of this stuff? And what happens is Aristotle, the idea of reproduction for Aristotle was a physical function, but for Thomas Aquinas, who adopted Aristotle and whom we'll get to, it becomes also kind of a metaphysical function. And the purpose of it is clear. The purpose of reproduction is to reproduce. So any kind of sexual activity that isn't aimed towards reproduction is sinful because it's not going by God's plan. And because God's plan has a purpose, there is a purpose that God intends for everything. And for reproduction, its sexuality is for reproduction, and that's what it's for. It's not for something else. We will get to that and discuss it in more detail. But back to the four causes, the purpose of man is to understand. Our difference from the animals is our ability to understand, and that is our purpose. And insofar as we have fulfilled that purpose, and done it consistently with the virtues, we have become a fully human critter. Now, I think this is very wrong-headed to pick out one of the things, and the way I put this is the human beings are the Swiss Army knives of critters. The stuff we can do is a long list of things, and it includes knitting, square dancing, yodeling, riding a unicycle, inventing iPhones. Which one of those is our essential purpose? I don't think Aristotle has any way other than arbitrary choice to claim that our intellect is the main thing. Uh, People, ballet dancers, are they primarily using their intellect? I don't think so. And yet, they are exquisitely trained to do something no other animal could ever hope to do, right? So I don't know. You could tell me if you could think about, I mean, this is just a common prejudice that's been handed down ever since the Greeks, that the intellectual mastery is superior to every other kind of mastery of human beings. I don't buy it, and you tell me why I should buy it. I'm open to this argument. It's just a prejudice that's a class prejudice that's been, I don't want to even be like a leftist or anything like that. To me, it's an intellectual problem that Aristotle has not defended. He just says, well, this is what we can do better than everybody else, so this is our purpose. Barry.
Tony, it brings to mind the work of Howard Gardner in the multiple intelligences, where he basically says that, the intelligent abilities that are measured by IQ testing are only a small fraction of all of the human things that really should be part of intelligence, including topographical intelligence and musical intelligence and so on and so forth. So I think your argument kind of dovetails with his thinking as well.
I'm not familiar with that guy, but it sounds like I agree with him because is John Coltrane intelligent? Uh, is Mozart intelligent? It's just it's such a weird thing to, but beyond intelligence, it's just like even physical, like things that aren't specifically uh, artistic and creative, um, just weird, like square dancing I mentioned. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do. It's just no end of weird stuff that human beings can do. And why do you pick one? Other than some kind of class preference, I'm not sure why you pick one over another. And this is with us to this day. We consider white collar workers and executives superior to laborers. Even if the laborers, I worked for a guy in a warehouse that was like a ballet dancer. His every movement was so graceful and so efficient. And you would never call that intellectual, but man, the guy was a genius in his in his own way. But we would never look up to him and say, "Oh, he's a model of human excellence," because he works in a warehouse. So I don't know. I'm not just being trying to support the working class here. I'm just saying intellectually, I don't see how Aristotle defends himself. And it's not just him, but this has been with us since those days, or maybe prior to those days. I'm not prepared to say in India there's a caste system, and so that's a whole different kind of program. But Aristotle, okay, Aristotle. Let's go on to the next point I wanted to make about Aristotle. Aristotle believes, and I have some passages I can read to you, that each type of individual has a purpose. That means uh, women have a different purpose from men. This is not what Plato says. Plato does not say. Plato says the only difference between men and women is that women have children and they're weaker. But intellectually, he sees no difference between men and women. And he doesn't exclude them from being guardians. Whereas Aristotle thinks is to, the purpose of men is to rule because they're the ones who have the intellect. Let me see if I can get up a couple of passages here that I think you'll find are kind of, um, and where this comes from is purpose. So here's what he says here. The female is, as it were, a deformed male. This is according to his book called Generation of Animals. And in politics, he says the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, and the one rules and the other is ruled. Um, this is this is an extension for him of the idea of telos or purpose. The purpose of women is to obey and do the things that women can do well, like supposedly um, household things. That's what they did in the Greek period is household things. So this is extended also to slavery for Aristotle. And I'm afraid where the Western world, I you can't trace these things like in a linear fashion, but where the Western world got its kind of idea, as particularly the European world got its idea that we're doing these poor people in these countries that we're colonizing, we're doing them a favor because they're stupid and they're going to be ruled by us and we're smart. So they're going to be better off if we enslave them. This comes right out of Aristotle, that there's people that are born to be slaves. Let me read you another passage if I can here. Um, For that which can foresee let's see, this is from Politics. For that which can foresee by the exercise of mind is by nature intended to be lord and master, and that which can with its body give effect to such foresight is a subject and by nature a slave. Hence, master and slave have the same interest. Now, nature has the same interest. In other words, the interest of the master uh, would not be put into effect without the slave. But on the other hand, only the master knows what the proper uh, uh, purpose should be. Nature has distinguished between female and the slave, for she is not niggardly, not meaning it in a racist sense. You know what that means. Like the smith who fashions the Delphian knife for many uses, she makes each thing for a single use, and I'm not sure I understand this. And every instrument is best made when intended for one and not for many uses. But among barbarians, no distinction is made between women and slaves because there is no natural ruler among them. They are a community of slaves, male and female, um, whereof the poets say it is meet that Hellenes should rule over barbarians, as if they thought that the barbarian and the slave were by nature one. This is right out of Aristotle now.
Tony, it seems like this is the natural result of relying on observation of what's going on around you instead of some underlying virtue or value system, because you're basically condoning. You're saying, look, at this is how the world is working, so therefore it must be the right way or the best way.
I'm afraid that's exactly right, Barry, because you bring us back to the, Meno's paradox. How do we know it's the right way? Apparently, uh, Aristotle thinks if it exists, it must be the right way or something like that. Let's see. Here's another one. For if every instrument could accomplish its own work, this is a metaphorical thing for slavery, obeying or anticipating the will of others, like the statues of Daedalus or the tripods of Hephaestus. These are mythological things, but they mean things that are put to a purpose by gods, which, says the poet, of their own accord entered the assembly of the gods, the poet being Homer. If in like manner the shuttle would weave and the plectrum touch the lyre without a hand to guide them, chief workmen would not want servants nor master slaves. In other words, if everything would do its own thing, if a knife would cut know what to cut by itself, it wouldn't need a master, is what he's saying. And this is going to be picked up by Aquinas to be used for a proof of the existence of God. But is there anyone thus intended by nature to be a slave, and for whom such a condition is expedient and right? Or rather, is not all slavery a violation of nature? He asks. There's no difficulty in answering this question on the grounds of both reason and of fact, for that some should rule and others be ruled is a thing not only necessary but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjection and others for rule. Uh, and he says, all tame animals are better off when they are ruled by man. Again, the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, and the one rules and the other is ruled. I just did that. Where there is such a difference as that between soul and body or between men and animals, the lower sort are by nature slaves, and it is better for them, as for all inferiors, that they should be under the rule of a master. For he who can be and therefore is another's pupil, and he who participates in rational principle enough to apprehend but not to have such a principle is a slave by nature. Um, and it's clear then that some men are by nature free and others slaves, and for these latter, slavery is both expedient and right. There you go. So um, this isn't the reason. The fact that I find this reasoning appalling is not the reason I don't like Aristotle as much as Plato. It's rather the intellectual foundation on which he bases this opinion. And I'm afraid it's not much better than what you said, Barry, that you look at it and it works. This must be the natural way of things. And the Greeks weren't the first to think this way for sure, but it's kind of when in retrospect, it's kind of daring of Plato to dream about some other situation or some or other organization of things. Um, okay, let me think. Just let me look at one more thing here. Oh, no, that's mainly it. I don't have. We're not going to spend a lot of time on Aristotle, but those are my central thoughts on his thinking, and he's by no means somebody you can disregard because he was so important for 1,000 years, and that's not an exaggeration. He was the main source of intellectual thought, the main center of intellectual thought for 1,000 years or more. Aristotle was. All right. So, any questions, comments, arguments?
I would just say that this also lives on in theories like eugenics and other things. This idea that, you know, there are people that are just destined to a certain the caste idea, caste systems. I mean, that is seems like a very much a legacy of this way of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, not only that, but the theory of evolution, it's very hard to get to wrap your mind around the fact that evolution has no telos. It has no purpose. The only purpose is to survive. And if that means that all the dumb people will rule, that's what's going to happen. It really doesn't care. Evolution doesn't care who rules. If I think I didn't make this one up, but if every institution except the insane asylum burns down and all humans are eliminated except those who are in the insane asylum, then evolution dictates that that is the future of mankind. That's how it works. It's just hard numbers, nothing else. So it's hard for people to get their minds around the fact that uh, this has to do with the supremacy of the human being, that we weren't the intended result of evolution, that intellectual understanding and whatever intellectual understanding we have was not the prime goal of evolution from the start.
So
But
teleological ethics is about Aristotle deciding what the purpose of humanity is, right? And the purpose of humanity is to rule over all the other creatures.
okay,
Is that what you're saying?
no. First of all, teleological ethics just has to do with um, what your result, what the result is that you want to achieve. In other words, it's looking at like if if we reduce the taxes on the poor, will they produce more or something like that? The question is what will result, what the result is of your ethical rule. Whereas the rule against lying has, it's not whether that's going to serve you well or not, it's that you just shouldn't do that. That's deontological ethics. Now, going back to Aristotle, his ethics um, are, when I say teleology, I'm not referring to Aristotle specifically. It's just that that's where the word comes from, and the concept of purpose, as opposed to a rule that doesn't necessarily concern itself with the purpose. Aristotle's telos is to determine what the purpose of everything is, and then to say, insofar as it's achieving that purpose, it's as it should be. It's the way it should be. So he thinks that women are achieving their purpose if they're obedient to men, and animals are achieving their purpose if they are tamed by men. That's kind of what Aristotle's saying.
Yeah,
So,
that's going back to what everybody else is saying. That doesn't it because it works for him. It's not that that is, it's always nice to, obviously I'm on the side of, I'm not a slave, so obviously I'm a smart person and I'm not a slave. So the fact that you can come to a conclusion about what the purpose is in itself not necessarily empirical. And, in other words, it goes back to I'm finding an answer. I like this answer, so I'm going to call that the purpose. But it may be that I'm misunderstanding or misobserving or putting the wrong gloss over what I'm seeing since I'm doing this all from my observation.
I think that you've kind of put your finger on the problem with saying something has a purpose. According to who? Like, what's the purpose of a tree? Is it to produce baseball bats? Is it to keep a fire warm in my house? Is it to look pretty? Is it to build my house? What is the purpose of a tree? Well, it's kind of completely subjective in the mind of the beholder, isn't it? And so Aristotle, to base his notion of what the purpose of man is on what he observes successful people to do in his society is entirely subjective. Maybe the purpose of man is to serve others. He never says that. He doesn't see that as the purpose of man. How do I know what it is? How am I going to say? Maybe it's to rule others. Maybe it's to debase others. Maybe it's to abuse others. What is the purpose of man? I mean, just on an ethical sense. And then maybe it's if you were a ballet dancer, your purpose in life is to be a great ballet dancer. So I don't see how he has any other than an arbitrary way of there's no objective way, I don't think, of determining the purpose of something. Whereas, I know what the purpose of an axe is. I often use, let me go back to that a second, just to illustrate the four causes again. The material cause of an axe is they are all related to the purpose. The material cause of an axe uh, has to be harder than wood if the axe is supposed to the purpose of the axe is supposed to chop wood. I can't do that if I make an axe out of marshmallows. It has to be made out of something harder than wood. It can be stone, it can be bronze, it can be steel, but it can't be wood or something softer than wood. And then the formal cause, well, an axe, in order to be an axe, can't be shaped like a globe. That won't chop anything. It has to be shaped like a wedge. And going back to material cause, it has to weigh something. If it looks like uh, a wedge, but it's made out of paper, uh, it's it's not going to have the heft, never mind the sharpness to cut wood. And then how did it come to be? Well, you're not going to find an axe just as a result of a geological process. Somebody's going to have to make the axe. And all this has to do with what the purpose is, the purpose that fashions the axe. The formal cause and the material cause have to be taken into consideration by the efficient cause in order to achieve the final cause. Just to put it in one sentence. Uh, so I think the formal cause always remains a bit arbitrary. I could use an axe to kill somebody. I could use an axe as decoration on my wall. So what is the purpose of the axe? I'm not sure that there's something that we can, in human
Tony,
tools, with human tools, we can figure out what the purpose is because they were made for a purpose. Otherwise, I'm not sure.
it strikes me that this line of thinking really opens the door to the Christian to God coming in as answering all these questions for you, or for us, um, because it does leave so much undefined or unclear. So it sort of opens the door for a religious explanation.
Well, and that's exactly how it was used by Aquinas, who we'll be coming to. Anything else? Any brilliant thoughts from you? By the way, I should just mention two people who aren't here with us today. Anne, who's still recovering in the hospital, I assume, unless somebody has an update on that. Uh, she apparently had some complications with her hip, and she's again in the hospital, having that seen to. And the other thing to make note of is Jake and Mary had a grandchild, so they're not here today. So that's something happy, not so happy for Anne, but happy for Jake and Mary. So that's why they're not here today. So I guess that's worth mentioning as well as Aristotle.
Tony,
So yeah.
did Aristotle have any inputs to our understanding of the physical world, or did he just steer clear of that?
Oh yeah. I think I mentioned his theory of gravity. Uh, Aristotle was very important in our understanding of the physical universe and astronomy. Uh, for through the Middle Ages, like I say, he was the authority, the Encyclopedia Britannica for that. If you remember, his explanation for gravity was everything has a place, a purpose, a telos, and all things be the gravity that you see and I see as a result of, say, density or mass, he saw as everything trying to get to achieve its purpose. And the purpose of fire was to be in the sky, the purpose of air is to be in between the sky and the earth. The purpose of the earth was to be down there, and the purpose of water was to be in the middle someplace. And everything was just trying to fulfill its purpose. And the Greeks viewed the world as somewhat animated like that, like everything, as Thales said, everything is full of gods. And so they saw any motion that occurred that you and I would think of as just the result of physical processes as intended motion. Uh, yeah, Aristotle was important for, and the four causes. This was used throughout the Middle Ages to understand the earth, the Aristotle's four causes. Yeah, he
Which is
was.
very odd because it sort of doesn't necessarily comport with the observations in the real world. In other words, yeah. I mean, you come to these conclusions, but in fact, that's not what you observe.
Well, Aristotle, by the way, had a staff of, you might call them graduate assistants that would go out and do research for him. And so he was, the reason he was so well recognized intellectually after he wrote was that he did have a lot of information on things that nobody else knew about. And because he'd send his guys out to observe different societies, different animals, uh, there was a bit of dissection of animals and humans, I think, involved. So he knew a lot of stuff, and he assembled from that what he thought were universal principles. He called the physical world was full of what he called particulars, and human beings used uh, categories or universals to describe the particular thing and group particular things and group them together so that we can make sense of the world. Otherwise, when we get to Kant, otherwise the world would just be this mass of um, data flowing into our eyes and our ears and our nostrils, this mass unorganized bunch of data. And the mind, what it does is put it together by using the categories that are embedded in the mind. And he doesn't seem to think, well, where'd those come from? He doesn't seem to raise that question. It's just this is what we do. But for Plato, he'd want to know, well, where did those categories come from? What do you mean categories? So that raised its head again in say Age of Enlightenment, those kind of questions. Anybody else? All right. As always, I just find it such a pleasure to meet with you guys, and we will wish the best for Anne and for the grandchild of Jerry and Make, Jerry and Make, Mary and Jake. Does anybody know the name of their kid, of the grandchild? I don't know it. Anyway, so we'll wish them the best and hope to see them next time on Tuesday, and I'll see you guys then too. All right,
Yes.
guys.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Tony.
Bye bye.